you touched on the Vikings, you both have, and the fact that the purple purgery and obviously the expectations coming off a season, which they had a good season. They win a division, but there was a lot of games last year where people will look at it and say, how did they win that game? How did they beat the Bears when they were down by 2 touchdowns at home? How did they beat the Giants with that 60-yard field goal on Christmas Eve and then ultimately lost out to them in the playoffs? And there was other games at home. The Colts game, the week pre-Christmas, they're down, was it 34, 36 points? It's a record return in terms of coming back. Like, there was so many games last year where they looked dead and buried, and yeah, Kevin O'Connell found a way to get this team over the line. People felt their luck ran out come the playoffs. Is that fair, Colin? Because what we recognised from the interview when we spoke to Kevin O'Connell last offseason was he sensed then he has a head coach which players will respect and love playing for, and that kind of turned out the way it did over the course of the season. And you saw it similar to the Lions, in which you saw some of the coverage after games in the locker room, and they were all so happy playing for him. But yet outside, no one really gave them the credit they deserved.
Yeah, I was hoping, David, you were going to go to Connor first, because I think this is the team where we might see the biggest kind of difference of opinion, because I'm not as down on the Vikings. A lot of people I know are, but as to the point that you're making, Brian, is why I believe in them. Ed Donatel was a disaster last year, right? I had the good fortune of seeing the Vikings a few times last year, both on this side of the Atlantic and in the States. They were a shambles. I mean, the yards they gave up, the inability to cover wide receivers, it was incredible to watch what they were doing, and ultimately it eventually caught up to them because teams really wised up to it, and especially when you get to the playoffs. I think Brian Flores is a huge upgrade. I really do, and I think when their issue is they're going to be limited ultimately, I think, by Kirk Cousins. But again, Kirk Cousins is a quarterback you can win with. I don't think you win because of, but they have Justin Jefferson, who you can make the arguments and you can put them in different ways, however way you want to rank. But the top 3 wide receivers are absolute superstars. To me, he is one of, if not the best wide receiver in the league. They've put another weapon alongside him. Obviously, Thielen has moved on, but Thielen, it was somewhat the law of diminishing returns last year. And I do think by bringing in Jordan Addison, that will complement Jefferson. I think this team could surprise people, because I think from what I'm seeing around the way people talk about the Vikings, and I get it, they won an awful lot of close games. I know Michael Lombardi is no fan of this team and thinks they will regress to the mean. And I understand that. Kevin O'Connell has coaching magic. I believe that, and I think Flores is an upgrade. I expect them to challenge for the division.
Connor, you're not sold on them, judging by your earlier comments.
No, not at all. I'm sorry. I'm going to agree with a lot of the individual points you're making, Colin, in fairness, but disagree with the overall conclusion. I think the Vikings are who they were in the playoffs last year. They were flat track bullies. They got lucky a couple of times, and once they got punched in the mouth, they couldn't get back up. And no disrespect, Brian, who did they get punched in the mouth by? The Giants. It's not even as if they went out to, one of the dominant teams in the NFC. Every time they were matched up against somebody who had game, they got curb stomped last year. The Cowboys ran all over them. The Packers handed it to them. The Eagles destroyed them. This is a team that won, and I know a lot has been made of this, and the statistic that jumps out. It's a team that won 13 games and still had a negative point differential. How do you win 13 games and still concede more points than you put up? I agree with you. Flores is a massive upgrade as defensive coordinator, but he's not got an awful lot to work with there. They're a talent-depleted unit. They lost to Darius Smith in the offseason as well. They go from maybe the second worst defense in the league statistically, and by the eye test, perhaps the worst defense in the league. Maybe they get to mid-table respectability, and perhaps that helps helps net out what I think will probably be regression to mean on the offensive side of the ball. look at Justin Jefferson's season. Like, what an incredible year he had. Absolutely outstanding player. You know, side note here, we give Howie Roseman his props quite rightly, and often the Eagles GM famously passed on Justin Jefferson and took Jalen Reagor instead. What a mistake that was. You're looking at relying on Justin Jefferson to produce historically good seasons to sustain what they were able to do last year. I think they have a really good group there. It's not just all on him. I think an awful lot of things went right for them on that side of the ball. I don't think enough is going to go right on that side of the ball. I don't think they're going to get far enough, even with the injection of Flores on the other side. And I think they'll have better around them in the division, with the Lions and the Bears, who I mentioned earlier, you know, handed them two victories last year. I think it's going to be harder for them. I don't think they're going to go as far as they did last year, and I think we're going to see a much more competitive division. I don't think they're going to have it all their own way, the way they did last season.
I'll throw another one in there. I think one of the biggest concerns, we talk about their defense, I think their running game is a bit of a concern, because Madison, for me, is the one who's going to have to step up, because I think Dalvin Cook will be traded come the start of the season. You know, there's so much talk over the course of the past month that the Dolphins were considering making a move. For me, it looks like he's open and available. If the right offer comes in, I'd suggest it'd be a kind of a July type of trade where someone goes down with an injury in the camps that's a running back that someone expects to be playing. They make a move for Dalvin Cook. That's another thing. They weren't consistent within the run game last year. I think there's too many question marks for this team right now. But it will be interesting to see who's picking who come August and September. Colin, you want to close out this episode with a particular point?
I mean, I agree with Connor, like last year, flat track bullies, but that's why I think Flores is so important. Like, Flores is a 4-time Super Bowl winner, right? He was the play caller when the Patriots shut down the Rams completely, right? I mean, what a chess match that was. I mean, yeah, Belichick was there with him, but we saw when he went to Miami what he could do. Like, he's really creative. Like, his Dolphins defenses, you know, blitz happy at times. He does so many interesting things. So the fact that he brings that experience, Ed Donatel, was like the kind of, I mean, take Simon and Garfunkel, right? Look at the talent disparity there. Ed Donatello was with Vic Fangio. And I have my issues with Vic, but ultimately Vic was clearly the brains and Ed Donatello was Pinky in that situation. So to me, to bring in Brian Flores and the experience that he brings as the head coach, the fact that he's going to change the mindset, because he's not going to accept purple purgatory. This is the guy who expects to win. I mean, there's a reason that despite the lawsuit, right, Mike Tomlin, and we will get to the Steelers when it comes to it, but I saw an amazing stat today over the past few years in terms of who has the most wins. It's like the Chiefs are ahead of everybody. Then you've got the Bills. Then you've got the Steelers. And that's the Steelers with like basically the corpse of Ben Roethlisberger and a hodgepodge of QBs. That's the Mike Tomlin effect. Mike Tomlin is a genius of a coach. Mike Tomlin recognized Brian Flores, brought him in despite everything that was going on with the league. That speaks volumes to me about the man. I think he will have a big impact. There's always a surprise team in the league who really, go against, I suppose, the off-season narrative. I think it could well be the Vikings.
In our NFC West episode, Connor proclaimed the 49ers the Mayo of the GAA, and the Vikings have been compared to Simon and Garfunkel on this episode. Our particular coaches have been compared to Simon and Garfunkel. That is our NFC North rundown of the off-season. Join us next time for our NFC East review.